Test, test.
That's what you were.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then I'll make sure that I do myself as well, so that it's not just in my
I lean to speak on the front deck
not
too.
just something I want to hear, you know, I don't know if that'll jump things up for you. You know what, I'm not finding the article. Our hearing status. So it's those are my four. Okay.
Yeah, it's substantial. And the latest
If I can
Sit here, or do you want me to tell me? Okay. It's not, kind of when a speaker ends, is that kind of what you do? Katie, I just, we looked at each other.
That's it.
Is that right?
That's it.
Okay. Because it was the witness for
Yeah, or what's that?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the person who's really.
Okay. Do you ever, in the midst of a
That's
person,
okay.
if they're going too long?
He's just below Huntsville and just above.
Right, right, that's right.
A lot closer to this
He's actually more interested in missile.
Right, right.
Yeah.
We just put it in.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, yeah,
Well, if they're in the middle of it, just, and then when there's a, and then you can, then you can,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, it's
it seems like, you know.
That's it.
But it seems like,
That's it. The speaker,
that seems like the logical line.
questioner, questioner, or, sometimes it just depends.
Never a dull day. Now you're praying for dull day.
Yeah, my graphic team. Then office.
And so there's something, oh, look at the appropriations subcommittee for this, and it says they are to, that was the one thing I didn't do this morning, to should have this, personal thing is to look at my, rules, to see what I can, basically. And it's a little detail.
Disagree with his assessment.
And then if I'm going to, because the rule is,
Right.
He had exactly.
that's good.
But I, so I know. Excellent. Okay, all right, excellent. I like that.
No. And then he went, he didn't take a job though.
So there's gonna be our number, you'll be two.
It's like,
Yeah.
I'll look it up. all of these.
But the number itself is usually always fine numbers. It's got two letters in front of it and it's fine numbers. It's just like a place different.
Yeah. Well, it's like- Like, when it's a small group.
Yeah. There was one time, what did I do? Supposed to be this way, but I had it split. Yeah. This was one of the most challenging ones.
So that was the right amount of pieces. So there's, so you see them.
Yeah, she really, you're kind of seeing my hair part first. Hey, Jeff, if somebody comes in and say that, yeah. Because a lot of times what they'll do is some real-time course I did, where, let's say they say, but it's very long, and so I just say, when I say it, whatever that added is, I'll go, yeah, that's it. But I'll go, right, and then I'll give the,
Twice I hit.
oh, there you go.
For 18, like FBI's bill, got an accident and I hit twice.
Just for the
And then twice. Yeah. And I know Lisa does hers, that we dodge out. So she does hers to stop out.
Okay.
But I just. Yeah. So that's just natural.
You know, the funny thing is if you do
Right, so state flight.
out of line, right, yeah, right, there could be some with the work out.
Right.
Of course, maybe you might change them, because I use, maybe she does, because I was an actress with that.
We're gonna put Lawson, Mike, James. We were at Steve, obviously.
I'll be able to get it, you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. You just come right on in, when you come out, like, Thank you for the information.
Yes, thank you.
Cut that out.
Subcommittee will come to order. Today we welcome back the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross before the subcommittee to testify about the Commerce Department's fiscal year 2021 budget. As we all remember, the Secretary decided not to come and visit with us last year, so I'm glad that there has been a change of heart. Despite your absence, we submitted questions for the record, which you returned to us just 4 days ago. This disregard for the role of Congress not only offends this committee, but diminishes our ability to do our job. I'm glad you're here today, and I hope that your presence here is an indication that the department is turning a new page. The department, through the Census Bureau, is in the midst of administering the 2020 census, with most people receiving their first outreach this week. I am sure all of us here want a fair and accurate count and will likely have numerous questions about how things are going. The impact of the coronavirus outbreak on your plans and the ongoing effects of the fight over the citizenship question. We will also want to hear more about the administrative data collection process, your commitment to the privacy, and the Bureau's plans for this information. I would be remiss if I did not mention the inadequacy of the department's budget request in a number of important areas that have bipartisan support. I think that many of the proposed cuts in the Commerce Department's requests show a disregard for the tens of millions of Americans and Americans' businesses who are helped by these programs. Your request once again seeks to eliminate major economic development programs like the Economic Development Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency. These agencies promote economic development in underserved areas and communities, including in many areas that voted for the president 4 years ago. The president's budget proposal also undermines Americans' manufacturing by once again proposing to eliminate the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. In Noaa, the administration has proposed eliminating at least 24 programs and included significant budget cuts for programs focused on climate change, research, frontline response to environmental issues at the state and local levels, and educating the next generation of STEM students. These proposals undermine the future of our nation's scientific leadership and our ability to respond comprehensively to global climate change, and that is unacceptable. In many cases, the proposed cuts are ones that Congress has rejected in the past. We expect to have a high, tight budget. Environmental for domestic, non-defense discretionary bills this year, and given the holes that this subcommittee will need to fill, it will be hard for us to target major need budget investments requested by the department. I look forward to talking with you more about these issues today. Look forward to your testimony. Glad that you're here. And with that, let me turn to Ranking Member Etterhall for his opening statement.
Thanks for yielding, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for organizing this important hearing today. And it's good to have the Secretary with us to learn more about the resources that are needed at the Department of Commerce. So welcome, Secretary Ross. We're honored to have you here today, and I wholeheartedly support the Department's efforts to promote job creation and economic competitiveness and to protect our nation's innovators and manufacturers from unfair trade practices in particular. This administration has stood up more for manufacturing jobs in Alabama and across the country than any other. So thank you, Secretary Ross, for your work on that. I thank President Trump for his commitment to that, for making America industry a very top priority. Beyond fostering jobs and opportunities for the people of North Alabama, the area that I represent, and across and literally across the nation, the Department of Commerce also oversees a variety of critical programs that are so important to this nation. For example, the Commerce Department administers a vital system of export controls that restrict the export of items that could have a detrimental impact on the national security of the United States. In addition, the Department's National Institute of Standards and Technology works to advance measurement science, standards and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. Further, as this committee is well aware, the Department of Commerce leads efforts to improve the quality and the efficiency of this decennial census and other important surveys. We are actually watching with great anticipation right now as the 2020 census gets kicked off later this month. The FY21 budget shifts our focus on the Census Bureau's post-enumeration operations, including the release of data for apportionment and for redistricting purposes. I'll note that many in Alabama and other states are concerned about whether the surge in illegal immigration after the last census, combined with the policies of sanctuary cities, will cause some of the states that actually help enforce our country's immigration laws to actually lose a congressional seat, as well as electoral vote in the presidential election process. It should be noted that this budget also supports critical activities for Noaa, including the provision of daily weather forecasts, severe storm warnings, climate monitoring, along with efforts to support fisheries and foster marine commerce. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that more Americans perish from tornadoes in the Southeast than anywhere else in the country. So much of the time we think of other parts, especially in the Midwest, but there's more Americans have actually died from tornadoes in the Southeast. As we debate the budget priorities for FY21, we remember that there was at least 24, if not more, Americans' lives that were lost over the past few days in tornadoes that occurred in Tennessee. And then we also remember the 23 Americans that lost their lives just a year ago in Alabama from tornadoes. NOAA's Vortex Southeast program is central to understanding and forecasting tornadoes in the Southeast and how residents respond to these warnings. I look forward to discussing many important matters with you, Mr. Secretary. I will have some questions about trade enforcement, weather forecasting, cybersecurity, in the quantum computing environment, and space commerce, among many other things that will be brought up. So, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here this morning, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Adholt. Mr. Secretary, you are now recognized to give your opening statement. Please try to limit your remarks to 5 minutes, and we will ensure that your full statement appears in the record.
Chairman Serrano, Ranking Member Adderholt, and members of the House Appropriations Subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss President Trump's fiscal year 2021 budget request for the U.S. Department of Commerce. It is a privilege to appear before you today. We are committed to working with you to grow the U.S. economy, defend our industries from unfair foreign competition, and protect our national security. The 2021 budget for the Commerce Department achieves these goals by providing the resources needed for the successful completion of the 2020 decennial census, by ensuring American leadership in space, by bolstering trade promotion, trade enforcement, and export controls, by providing for satellite acquisition and vessel recapitalization for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, by generating the timely economic data needed by businesses to analyze markets, invest in communities, and hire American workers, and by supporting research, development, invention, and standards in leading-edge industries and technologies. In the short time allotted to my opening statement, I will discuss 3 priorities for next year. First, the Census Bureau, then space, and then trade. The request for Census Bureau for fiscal year 2021 is $1.6 billion. I am pleased to report that with your support, we are on budget, on schedule, and on track to accomplish the 2020 decennial census. Next year's budget supports the important post-enumeration operations for determining apportionment and the allocation of federal funding. The Commerce Department's Office of Space Commerce is the second priority initiative that urgently needs funding. Our request of $15 million advances U.S. leadership in space as we shift responsibility for tracking tens of thousands, in fact hundreds of thousands, of pieces of space debris from the Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce. The exponential growth of commercial satellites is increasing geometrically the risk of catastrophic collisions that could generate additional debris and threaten critical space assets. The task of tracking this debris and providing adequate warnings to space operators was set forth in Space Policy Directive Number 3. Finally, the budget requests $474.4 million for the International Trade Administration, the ITA, enabling U.S. companies and their domestic employees to compete on a level international playing field. We seek an additional $5 million for ITA's Enforcement and Compliance Division to keep up with the increasing number of anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases. Funding also will enable us to conduct additional reviews of foreign acquisitions of U.S. companies as required by the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, FIRMA. In my time with you today, we can discuss the Commerce Department's budget request for all of the bureaus, including Noaa, NIST, the Bureau of Industry and Security, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and other agencies within the department. On a personal note, Chairman Serrano, congratulations on your honorable service here in Congress and all you have done for your constituents and for the American people. I truly wish you well in your retirement from this chamber. Now, on behalf of the department, I will try my best to answer your questions.
Thank you for your comments, and I'll miss this place, but it's been a long time. 30 years here and 16 in the New York State Assembly. 46 years is a long time, and maybe it's time to go watch a few Yankee games down the block from where I live, you know. But thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. Mr. Secretary, as more cases of the virus make the headlines, I'm concerned about how the census is planning to address the potential impact this will have not only on response, but also on the number of partners and enumerators who are willing to ensure an accurate count. What can you tell us about the Census Bureau's plans to deal with the coronavirus? And do you anticipate that you will spend any of your contingency funds for this purpose?
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, because we added internet responses as an alternative this year, and we in fact expect a very large proportion of the responses to be by internet. So fortunately, that doesn't involve any physical contact with people, and therefore is in and of itself an advantage. Second, people can also respond by phone. Again, doesn't involve physical contact. And they still have the original ability to respond by mail or in paper. And as far as I know, the postal system has not posed any moratorium on postal service. In terms of the department itself, we have a fusion center set up at Census headquarters here, and that involves a group of people that are on 24/7 to alert senior management to any contingencies that develop, such as an outbreak of coronavirus in a particular location, such as a change in health warning from the federal government. So we are very well equipped we have a quick response team. We've already organized the response team, and therefore I believe we've done as much as we can to be ready for whatever contingencies come up. whether coronavirus, whether weather, whether whatever.
In the information in the comments that I'm sure the department gets from the people on the field who are going to conduct the census, people that have been placed, they're all ready to do the work. Are they showing any concern about how the virus might affect?
So, well, we've only begun the mailing a couple of days ago. I'm happy to say we already have gotten some internet responses. So that's the only direct thing that we are able to comment on there. Everybody is obviously concerned with all the media coverage. I don't think there's anybody who lacks concern about the potential for it. So we'll just have to play it by ear. We are ready to make responses, and we will deal with the situation as it evolves.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your budget for Noaa proposes to consolidate the National Centers for Environmental Prediction, Climate Prediction, and Weather Prediction in your congressional justification. You know that it will limit some of NOAA's products and services which have supported national security planning and execution for a number of things, including pandemic health planning. Do you stand by this proposed decrease in operational capacity in light of the coronavirus?
Well, in terms of the census, and we have a $2 billion contingency fund available to us. As of the moment, we don't think there's any particular necessity to use it. What we are doing to try to keep the workplace safe is encouraging employees to do 4 things. 1, practice good hygiene, stop handshaking, clean hands at the door, create habits and reminders to avoid touching faces, disinfect surfaces like doorknobs, increase ventilation, be careful with meetings and travel, limit food sharing, strengthen health screening, and stay home if they feel sick or if they have a sick member in their home. So those are the very specific actions that we have already taken within census.
I appreciate that, but within Noaa, I had asked you just to comment on what your cuts would do for the budget Noaa, which proposes to consolidate the centers. Can you tell us anything about that?
I'm sorry, I had a little trouble hearing you, sir. I believe you were asking about the Regional Coastal Resilience Program?
No. The consolidation of climate prediction centers, weather prediction center functions at Noaa,
Consolidation.
as well as pandemic health planning.
Functions at NOAA.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those were moves initiated by the career staff, and their purpose is to increase the efficiency of the operation. They don't believe that there will be any material adverse consequence from doing so.
Okay, thank you. We'll revisit that, I'm sure, during the year. I am concerned with news reports that the Department of Homeland Security is deploying elite tactical teams to cities, including New York, with little to no justification that would potentially suppress response rates. The Commerce Department has a responsibility to ensure that the Census Bureau meets its constitutional mandate to enumerate all persons. Did you communicate concerns to the DHS Acting Secretary about the potential impact to the census operation? And if not, can you commit today that you will ask for a delay in this specific operation until the conclusion of the 2020 census? Now, you know that in one way or another, we've been very public about the fact that anything that may give people a feeling that they're being chased or looked after or information is being used for other purposes will only hurt the census count. And so these tactical teams, these elite teams being sent into the cities is concerning a lot of people.
Well, Census is not an enforcement agency. We do not give the schedule of our enumerators to Homeland Security, to ICE, or to anyone else. So there's no danger that enforcement officials will be following a census taker into a home. Second,
let me just
all
finish.
census
Go ahead.
employees take a lifetime oath not to disclose any individual personal information to anybody. It's not permitted to be used for any purpose other than enumeration. And if anyone were to violate, it's punishable by a jail sentence and a very large fine. We also have done the best we can with cybersecurity. The data are encrypted from the moment it comes into our possession, while it's being transmitted, and when it's at rest in the computers.
Let me finish this up by just telling you that, asking you, do you have any idea as to why these teams are being deployed, especially at this particular time? You see, I can't emphasize enough the need to have the census count be one that is free of any outside interference. And when you send people in to look for certain things in neighborhoods, it just has a chilling effect on people's ability to allow themselves to be counted.
Well, census employees are very clearly identified as such. They have a badge, they have a physical ID, so there should not be any confusion in the part of the public as to whether it's a census employee or an ICE person on the scene. Second, I mentioned to you the precautions that we already do take. And and third, we are running much more in the way of advertising, explaining why the census is safe, why the data are protected, and why we're not asking the citizenship question and are only asking basically 9 very straightforward, easy to answer questions. So we have spent a lot more on advertising than ever before. We have a lot more partnerships with community institutions and national institutions than ever before. We're doing a lot more ethnic advertising to those segments of the population that might be particularly concerned about enforcement activities. So we are doing the best we can with that. We also have established on our website a rumors section where we will try to deal with anything we've found that comes out that's a fraudulent rumor that might give people cause for alarm. And finally, we have engaged very constructively with Facebook, Twitter, and all the other social media organizations to have them be very scrupulous about taking down misleading ads that might come, or blogs that might come in.
Thank you. Let me just close by saying that I wish the Commerce Department would at some time ask the Justice Department just why they're coming in at this particular time. Mr. Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I commend the department for creating a new Section 232 exclusion portal that handles the vast amount of 232 exclusion requests. And I know you've received quite a bit of good feedback on that effort. However, some users of this new portal are reporting that it is more difficult for users to download a request objection or rebuttal submission. And even with the new portal, we're hearing that reports that it is still very difficult to track and to analyze aggregated requests by product, volume, country of origin, alloy, and other relevant factors. Furthermore, users report being unable to assess within the portal whether granted exclusion requests have been utilized and to what extent. My question that I would ask to you is, does the department intend to feature such data, including as a filtering option, and does Commerce have a timeline for improving the elements of the portal that users are finding frustrating or that are lacking in some ways?
Well, we have been simplifying things, and we have been accelerating the response time. We've achieved a 79% decrease in initial posting times and a 63% decrease in decision times under the portal regime. On average, the department now posts with requests within 3 days of submission and renders decisions on those cases that have no objections within 59 days of submission. That's about the fastest that we can do, sir, because of statutory periods for notifications.
Oh, but regarding these areas that people are finding that are objectionable, the frustrating and lacking, are y'all looking into that, to how y'all can improve that?
We are, and we have phone number for people to call and internet place for them to notify if they have questions about terms that they don't understand or other guidance that they may need. And all ex parte communiques are posted on the website. There are no concealed ex parte communications.
Let me ask you about working to mitigate enforcement circumvention. That is product modification, transshipment. Given the significant cost the department incurs investigating these trade remedy cases, how are you working with the enforcement of those things?
Well, we recently, at our suggestion, the President posted another executive order that deals with what we call derivative products. Those are ones that are largely just the raw material with a little tiny modification that have increased in quantity and therefore represent a form of circumvention of the original 232. So that has dealt with quite a few of those items, and we keep screening the monthly data, both in steel and aluminum, in search of any more. Plus, very recently, the aluminum industry filed with us a petition covering another 22 items that they feel may be circumventing. We're studying that very carefully, and if warranted, we will self-initiate again on that.
What criteria does the department use when it's determining whether a case is ripe for self-initiation, as it did in 2017 with the common alloy aluminum sheet from China?
Right. Well, we are data-driven. We are fact-driven. So to the degree that we can gather together on our own or with help from industry sufficient facts to warrant self-initiation, we do it. We also try especially to consider doing it in cases where the industry is worried about retaliation from a foreign country, where they may have some complaints but also have some operating facilities. So we are very interested in self-initiation because it speeds up the process, it lowers the cost to the American industry for conducting the process, and we think in general it's a very worthwhile activity.
And can you talk a little bit about how the department is seeking to make trade remedies accessible to petitioners who are actually small businesses?
We hold seminars around the country. We have offices in many tens of American cities that try to help people understand both how they can export better and how they can protect themselves from illicit imports. That's probably the best mechanism we have for dealing with the small business community.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We now welcome the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Lowy.
Thank you and welcome. Nice to see you again. I'm sorry, but I was dealing with coronavirus next door. There are
Oh, my
many
goodness.
hearings at the same time.
Well, I hope you haven't been exposed, Congressman.
No, I hope not. But we do have multiple hearings, and I'm glad to see you today. Mr. Secretary, the Republican National Committee recently sent mailers soliciting campaign donations that were designed to look like the census form, with existing concerns around disinformation campaigns on social media. These kinds of mailers are dangerous, predatory, and exacerbate concerns with undercounting. If you could share with me what the Census Bureau is doing to swiftly, directly, and effectively counter these efforts to ensure a complete count.
Thank you for that question. It's a very relevant one. As you're probably aware, something like a fifth of all the internet users around the world are indicated to be bots. So it's a real problem to have extraneous material come in. So we have put up a rumors page on our website that counteracts whatever rumors we are aware of. Further, we've made relatively formal arrangements with the major social media entities, Facebook, Twitter, and the others, so that they are very vigilant about taking down bad material that comes up. And Facebook, as you're probably aware, has taken down that Republican National Committee message.
Was there any, frankly, research done to suggest that the Republican National Committee did not do it, or are you acknowledging they did do it?
Well,
And then I'd be interested to know what the administration is doing about that.
Well, I have no idea whether it was a legitimate thing by the RNC or not. What I do know is that we have made a point of emphasizing in our ads and in our communications that we don't ask for money, we don't ask for people's social security number, we don't ask for anything like that. And Facebook has already taken that ad down.
Do you have this, does the Census Bureau or the department have any authority to penalize those who falsely present documents as a census form?
Alas, present documents. If you're talking about social media communiques or advertisements, I don't think we have any legal authority to deal with them. We are not.
I just want to make it clear, these were mailers from the Republican National Committee going directly to people's home.
Right. No, I understand what the situation appears to be. I don't believe we have any authority over it. If you are aware of any statutory authority, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, I would like to suggest that this is outrageous. No one, to my knowledge, refuted the fact that the Republican National Committee sent these forms in. It was deceptive. And I'd like to know what the government of the United States that interfaces with the Republican National Committee is going to do about it, because it is outrageous.
I hear your observation.
Okay, let me on to the next one. I'm really concerned about the data sharing agreements the Census Bureau has with multiple federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department. Many of these agreements were signed months ago. My staff has been asking for copies of these since at least October. My staff were only recently notified these agreements were posted at the end of February.
Most of those agreements were not even entered into until February. We had to negotiate agreements with the various agencies, and that took quite a while to do. To my knowledge, we posted them as soon as we had definitive agreement. As to the nature of the sharing arrangement, It's a one-way sharing. We get access to their data. We have no obligation to provide any data to them, and indeed, we're prohibited from doing so. So it's a one-way arrangement that we have with them.
Well, I'd like more information on that, Mr. Secretary, because there would be real concern among those who are asked for information for the census if, in fact, that information was transferred to the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm very concerned that your department has delayed to get this information to my staff, and only after it was publicly available, because I personally was very concerned about that. Look, we all want to get an accurate census, but we know there are concerns.
Well, I am not aware that anyone within our department did anything deliberately to delay posting on the website the information. If they didn't respond to a direct request, I apologize for that. They should have. But in any event, as soon as we had definitive agreements, it's my understanding we put them on the website.
If I can just take one more, can I ask one more question? Okay. Now, just to pursue this issue, I understand the Census Bureau is producing citizenship data at the block level. Now this data is supposed to be anonymized to ensure privacy, but the data you plan to release will effectively show where pockets of citizens and non-citizens reside. Is that correct?
That is the request that was made in the executive order by the president. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I thank you for that information. I think it's entirely inappropriate, and we will follow up, and I'd like to have some explanations about who directed it, and if the president himself did, I'd like a response. I don't expect him to come here before this committee at any time. But I thank you for your honesty and your straightforward response, and we will certainly pursue it. Again, the data you plan to release will show where pockets of citizens and non-citizens reside, and it's the president who has requested that data?
Well, what we are doing is the following. We have not received all of the raw data from the federal agencies. The passport data from State Department has not yet been forthcoming. It will be within the next few days. The data we have received, the career personnel at Census are analyzing, trying to figure out what steps they can take with it. So we don't have a final decision yet. What we do feel very strongly about is we will mask the data that we put out, the so-called differential privacy activity, which essentially consists of introducing static into the material so that individual data would be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to track from comparing the census data to other public data.
You've been very generous, Mr. Chairman, with your time, and I would suggest that this is such a critical issue because the amount of money we get in New York is dependent on, and in other states, accurate census data. So if there's monkey business around here, and if this census data is being used by the Department of Homeland Security or other departments, this is a big problem for me and for all of us in the Congress. So I look forward to pursuing this and getting additional information. Thank you for your generosity.
It will also be a big problem for anyone who leaks it because it is a criminal offense that's punishable by multiple years in prison and by a large fine. And as I mentioned to Chairman Serrano before, every census taker and me and everybody relative to it takes a lifetime oath not to divulge to anybody other than in the context of the census enumeration.
Wait a minute, not to divulge, but what to divulge? So it's illegal to divulge to another agency?
We cannot
Gather
divulge.
that's what's happening.
We cannot divulge individual personal data to anybody.
Look, let me repeat this again, and then you've been very generous. I understand that. This data is supposed to be anonymized to ensure privacy.
Right.
But the data you plan to release will effectively show where pockets of citizens and non-citizens reside. We can follow up when we have more time, unless you want to give the generosity of the chair, but that's information that should not be released with the data collection.
I'd be happy to have the census professionals doing the work on differential privacy to explain in great detail what they're doing to try to shield individual data.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your generosity.
Thank you. Ms. Roby.
Thank you, Chairman Serrano and Ranking Member Adderholt. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your willingness to come before our committee today. Every day, emergency managers work to keep our communities alerted to and safe from potential threats, including severe weather. Many Department of Commerce programs, including National Weather Service websites and NWS chat, are utilized by local and state emergency managers and television meteorologists to collect and distribute real-time life-saving information. Just last week, I had the opportunity to meet and discuss ongoing issues with emergency managers from Alabama, and one of their concerns is that these programs have failed to perform when they are needed most because of outdated and overloaded information technology systems. And so I understand in my meeting with them that there's a plan for National Weather Service integrated dissemination program that outlines these necessary updates that's currently under review by the Department of Commerce. So I know this is a very nuanced question, and if you don't have an answer for me here today, that's fine, but I wanted to present it here publicly to ask you if you could share more information with us about the department's plan for improvements and if Congress can expect to see a report on this issue.
Well, we are trying to deal with the problem of outdated and overloaded technology throughout the department, and in fact, I believe throughout the federal government. The federal government has not been as quick as private sector to update technology. We have within Commerce something like 70 different systems of different vintages, so you can appreciate the problem of having them interact with each other. If there are more specific concerns you have relating to census or Noaa or the others, be glad to schedule a briefing for you.
That would be great. I appreciate it. Online shopping has become an everyday occurrence for millions of Americans, myself included. No matter what type of product you're buying, the safety and reliability of that product is important. As online shopping has become more prominent in today's culture, the sale of counterfeit goods has become a growing issue around the world, and I'm grateful to serve as the co-chair of the Congressional Trademarks Caucus. I've dedicated my efforts during my time in Congress to propose solutions to this pressing issue. As you know, I'm an appropriator. I'm here today, but I also wear a hat on judiciary as well. And I recently joined my colleagues in introducing a bipartisan piece of legislation called the Stopping Harmful Offers on Platforms by Screening Against Fakes in E-Commerce Act, or the Shop Safe Act. The Shop Safe Act protects consumers and brands for the sale of counterfeit goods online and incentivizes e-commerce platforms to adopt best practices in order to decrease the sale of these goods. So my question for you, sir, is what is the Department of Commerce doing to protect our communities from the sale of counterfeit goods online and to maintain consumers' confidence in e-commerce?
Well, first of all, the USPTO, the Patent and Trademark Office, engages with officials here and abroad to improve our domestic and foreign IP laws and regulations. And in fact, we recently participated in a very large campaign to make sure that the new head of the WIPO, the global organization that deals with intellectual property, is someone who's appropriately sensitive to it. Second, USPTO works with both domestic partners and countries around the world, building their capacity in regulating intellectual property, dealing with counterfeit goods. Third, we have public outreach and education. For example, we actually had a video contest on the topic of consumers combat counterfeits with 6 winners ranging from age groups across the country. In addition, last June, we had a public forum with the McCarthy Institute to discuss challenges that brands, owners, and how public and private organizations can help in the fight. PTO has a team dedicated to China issues, which is where a lot of this comes from. That includes IP attachés stationed in 3 cities in China at the U.S. embassies and at 2 consulates there. So that's another very effective activity. In terms of more specific things overall, in January, the White House released a memo on combating trafficking in counterfeited and pirated goods. That memo contained a number of recommendations for action to educate the public and combat the sale and proliferation of counterfeit and pirated goods. With respect to commerce, we are taking action to implement the recommendations of this memo. And those include the USPTO has entered into an agreement with the National Crime Prevention Council to partner in a multi-year public awareness campaign aimed at educating the public about the dangers of counterfeit goods. The focus of the campaign is on educating teenagers, tweens, and their parents about the dangers of buying fake products. And on March 19th, USPTO plans to conduct an event launching this initiative where it will release another anti-counterfeiting video to join in this effort. Finally, we will play a leading role in examining the state of current law with regard to secondary liability for online platforms for trademark infringement. The goal is to assess the state of current laws for secondary trademark liability and to hear from stakeholders regarding the potential need to enhance the laws in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for deciding to come this year. Protecting the safety and the health of the American public, I see as one of our highest duties, don't you?
Yes, sir.
In your testimony, you spoke of the need to support the National Weather Service and its forecasting capabilities, and of the vital importance of accurate forecasts of hurricanes and other extreme weather events. And I agree with that. It's vital to protect human American lives and also to safeguard our economy by accurate forecasting. But today you're here proposing nearly $750 million cut to NOAA's overall budget. That's the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Is that approximately correct, about $750 million cut to NOAA?
Well, we are terminating certain parts and shrinking certain parts, but the regional climate services are critical to providing climate services tailored to the specific needs of the region that they serve.
But overall, it's about $750 million cut to NOAA's overall budget, correct?
I believe a good part of that, sir, is due to difference in acquisition of hardware, but that sort of a number seems about right to me.
Okay, and Chairman Serrano was correct, wasn't he, when he said 24 programs are eliminated from NOAA under your proposed budget?
24 programs have been merged into or superseded by other programs. It's not that none of those functions will be provided any longer.
Is the answer yes, sir?
Well, that's my answer, sir.
Right. The budget also proposes a 40% cut to oceanic and atmospheric research and a $15 million cut to the National Weather Service workforce. Mr. Secretary, it's important not only for the government to have the resources accurately to forecast the weather, but also for Americans to be able to trust the government's forecasts and warnings during a disaster. Last fall, this administration created unnecessary fear by grossly exaggerating the probability that Hurricane Dorian was going to go into Alabama, despite scientific evidence telling us otherwise. Rather than helping stop public panic, your office directed Noaa to refute its own scientists and issue a statement pushing this false narrative. Noaa's chief scientist called this response, quote, political, unquote, and a, quote, danger to public health and safety. Noaa's chief scientist said that. And your department's inspector general opened an investigation into the politicization of the forecast. Government employees are now fearful that their careers are at risk if they support sound science and if they tell the truth. Our government has to inspire confidence and trust in times of crisis. It's not a game. This goes beyond politics. Real lives are at stake, and here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that your actions, which sowed distrust in our government, are going to have ramifications as we go forward battling this coronavirus. And I fear the administration in which you serve has not learned a lesson about the importance of truth in science and transparency. Your administration said that anybody that wants a test for a virus can get one. And scientists say we don't have enough tests to do that. Your administration said the virus has already peaked. Scientists disagree. Your administration has made it clear that it wants to suppress the number of reported cases. Scientists want to understand the scope of the problem and take action to contain the virus. Americans need to be able to trust the government, especially in these life-threatening situations, whether they be extreme weather events or pandemic outbreaks. When the health and safety of American families is at stake, we have to stick to facts and support the science, even if scientific evidence lead to conclusions that are not politically advantageous. Mr. Ross, I hope you understand the role you have played in sowing distrust in our federal government. Will you pledge today, before all of us, to do everything in your power to help restore trust in our government and only disseminate information that is accurate?
Well, first of all, sir, I dispute many of the characterizations that you put forward. I did not order anyone to change a scientific opinion. As I said in my original confirmation hearings and have said repeatedly since, I'm not a technologist. I believe scientists should be the ones who issue scientific judgments. I have never directed any scientist at Noaa to change one word of any, or anywhere else, change one word of any research report, nor have I ever threatened anyone with loss of job if they failed to do so. So those are inaccurate characterizations. I think there are probably other inaccuracies, but it was so many statements you made, I frankly don't remember all of the content, but I'd be happy to address individual ones if you wish.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. First of all, I want to associate myself fully with the remarks of Chair Serrano and Mr. Cartwright as to the department's slashing of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's budget, proposed slashing $250 million, 14%. This is the second year, at least that as I have been on this committee, subcommittee, where you have done that. And I don't understand what appears to be an institutional antipathy towards research and development in our oceans and atmospheres. It doesn't make any sense to me. These are critical parts of our natural world that influence us and impact us in so many ways, whether they be scientific, economic, right across the board. And I'm going to leave it at that. I don't support them. I hope that this Congress again restores and increases that funding. That's critical, and I don't get the policy judgments that are going into that. Let me move to another subject, and that is.
Is there a question, sir? About
No,
that?
it's just a statement. I I'd like to discuss our country's U.S. Travel and tourism industry with you, which is critical, of course, to our country. This is an industry that is a multi-trillion-dollar industry for our country. Estimates it's somewhere in the range of 3% plus of GDP, millions of jobs. Critical export industry, 10% of all exports, I think 40%, as I recall, of service exports, and an industry that is obviously on the ropes because of the coronavirus crisis. The impact is especially severe in states such as my Hawaii, where it is the #1 industry, accounting for 1/4 plus of our economy directly and indirectly a lot more, many, many jobs, and that is true of many, many other states. You are the chair of the Tourism Policy Council, which is our premier federal organization that is intended to coordinate U.S. travel and tourism policy across 9 departments, as well as the leaders of the travel and tourism industry. So you are at the epicenter of what the response is from our government to address the disproportionate impact of coronavirus on the travel and tourism industry. And I've got 2 questions for you. First of all, what can you tell us that you're doing about the travel and tourism industry in this dire time for the industry, #1. And #2, I did note that the Department of Commerce's budget request proposed a substantial reduction of the International Trade Administration, which is where the National Travel and Tourism Office is housed. And my question is, would you reconsider that budget reduction as to the ITA in the context of the coronavirus, especially as it impacts the travel and tourism? And I'm going to add a 3rd question, which is relevant. Sorry about that. What specific appropriations do you believe you need to address this crisis from the perspective of the travel and tourism industry? What is not in your budget that, now that we know where we are and where we appear to be going on travel and tourism in this country, do you need to help this major industry?
Well, you are certainly correct that we are very involved with the travel and tourism industry and are very active with helping to promote it. We meet quite regularly with the Advisory Council, which has among its members most of the major and many of the minor people in that industry. As to the coronavirus itself, first obligation of the administration is to protect the American public. Once that's been done, then we can deal with the differential impact on individual industries. The President gave at least some indications, I think it was last night, about some measures he's considering to try to mitigate the effects. Let's see what he comes up with. But we are very, very concerned to try to protect the economy as much as we can within the confines of not wanting to spread the disease.
I agree very much with you, Mr. Secretary, that all of our first and foremost obligation is to protect our citizens and others. And I understand that protection is going to inherently impact the travel and tourism industry. However, I would also say to you, sir, that I don't believe that this should be a sequential process because the travel and tourism industry is being impacted right now as a result of the responses that we need to be taking. So I would suggest to you that the Council should focus with a laser-sharp attention to what can be done to address the needs of this industry from an economic dislocation perspective now, rather than down the road.
Surely. Well, the best thing for travel and tourism, in fact, the best thing for the whole country, will be as quickly as possible finding a vaccine, as quickly as possible testing everybody, and as quickly as possible getting rid of this problem. I think the actions the President took already have helped prevent this from becoming an Italy-type situation where, for all practical purposes, the whole country has been quarantined. So I don't think it's quite correct, sir, to say that it's been sequential. I think the administration has tried very hard to be on top of the problem. As you know, they give daily briefings, and they try to put into perspective the magnitude of the problem relative to the hysteria that's been generated around it. So we're trying our best to be responsible, give people accurate information, but not unduly alarm them so that they take remedies that are not necessary and are not warranted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Ross, for being here today. I wanted to follow up on Chairwoman Lowy's questions and comments about the false ads, whether it's from Facebook or the RNC, that had been mailed out. In regards to the Facebook ads that were removed that claimed to be part of the census, did the Bureau take any further steps to dispel this information?
Well, the Bureau has not been able to find any statutory authority to take any kind of enforcement action against anybody who has done misleading ads. We just don't have the authority to do anything.
Did the Bureau post anything on its own rumors page that could help dispel the rumors?
I know that it has posted information such as Census never asked for money. If I'm not mistaken, that ad asked for money. They also, we posted that we never ask for Social Security number. So we tried to correct things and make clear what we do and what we don't do.
So if an ad didn't request money or Social Security numbers or personal...
I'm sorry?
So if there was a similar ad, but it didn't request Social Security or private information, nor did it request money, would that be okay?
No, I didn't suggest that, but you were asking what did we do in response to that specific ad, and those were specific features, as I recall it, in that ad.
Was any information released, a statement perhaps by you or the Census Bureau dispelling it?
If we put out a statement every time there was something that was erroneous, we would be putting out probably hundreds of statements a day. So it's really not practical for us to do that.
And in terms of the mailers by the RNC, has that been posted on the rumors webpage, or any public statements been made about that?
The ad is down. The ad has been pulled down.
Oh, I was talking about the mailers that Chairwoman Lowy was referring to, the RNC mailers.
I don't know the exact status of those. I'll be glad to get back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Have you spoken with the president or anyone on his team on the government side or the political side to request that they stop these look-alike mailers?
I don't have any influence or control over the RNC and whatever ads they run. I had no idea that they were running that. They just did it.
Will you work with any other agencies, maybe even the Justice Department, to make sure that the look-alike mailers are not being sent out by mail or by social media outlets via social media?
We have been researching but have yet to find where we have the statutory authority to take action to block them.
I understand, and I appreciate that. And if you could get back to us with any further actions that your Bureau or you might take, I think it would be really helpful and really influential if you or the Bureau could make any public statements dispelling this type of information that's being sent out. I wanted to ask another question, similar topic about the census. And as you know, and as you've mentioned, it's imperative that everyone, regardless of citizenship, participates. We're trying to think of creative and cost-effective ways for people to participate and to increase involvement. As you may know, in many states, including my home state of New York, when people participate in elections, when they go vote, they get a cute voting sticker that says, "I voted," and they pass it out to voters at polling stations. And people of all parties wear this as a point of pride and wear it all day and all week even. and this hopefully motivates others to vote as well. I was wondering if there was a similar idea that could be applied, such as a sticker, for example, for the purposes of the 2020 census, for people who are filling out the census to encourage others.
What we have done, one of the most undercounted and hard to count groups are infants that are born during the calendar year prior to the census date. So we've started a program of little hats to go to the babies about the census. So that's been one way we've been trying to deal quite specifically with a severely undercounted part of the population.
Okay, thank you. I'd love to work with you on potential ideas after that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Yes, Secretary, I just want to continue on that line of questioning about the flyer that was circulated. And the last time I talked about something, they talked about rumors. I have a copy of it, and I just want to read what it said. It says 2020 Congressional District Census, and it says, your participation is urgently needed as a key facet of our overall strategy to ensure President Trump and Republican candidates are reelected. The Republican Party is conducting a census of key members and supporters in congressional districts across the country. The opinions registered in this document will be used to build and expand our national grassroots operation that will show that President Trump has the support of the American people to continue to move forward and act on critical issues facing our country. I find it very challenging that in your position as a secretary, that you have no communication or authority to have a conversation. I do believe you have staff meetings to say that the party that you are affiliated with, allegedly, it asks things like, how do you identify yourself? Do you think that President Trump is leading our country? And it says you've been selected to represent voters and respond by a certain date. And please answer these questions to the best of your ability. This to me is horrible. When we are all nonpartisan, committed to an accurate count. And I campaign as well as anyone else, but this is unacceptable. And for you to say as the Secretary of Commerce that you really don't have any influence and you haven't taken steps to stop this is very troubling. I have a question for you. The development of 5G technology, U.S. leadership in 5G is very important, and I'm concerned that the Chinese are playing a big role in global standard setting process for these new technologies. However, I have also been told that U.S. companies are actually scaling back their participation at global meetings, apparently due to the Commerce Department export control rules that say our companies cannot participate in technology meetings if Huawei is attending. That seems to be defeating the purpose of maintaining our leadership. Can you please address that, and is that true?
Yes, we issued quite a while ago a directive, a policy directive, clarifying that people can participate in international standard organization conferences. We are putting out a further one very shortly because some people apparently did not quite understand the original directive. But we are actually encouraging people to participate. And as to Huawei, I think my views on Huawei are pretty well known. So I'm certainly not a co-conspirator of Huawei.
I understand that, but we have to have a seat at the table, and I hope that you clarify that. My last question for you, sir, is last year I introduced H.R. 153. That's a resolution supporting the guidelines for ethical development of artificial intelligence. While I commend the administration's request of a total of $1.1 billion in non-defense AI research, that number is far lower than what needs to be done. For context, the Chinese government has spent over $8 billion in 2018. We need to ensure that the president's focus on AI does not come at the deterrent of other research. This technology is going to be transformational in how we do business. How can we expect the United States to remain competitive with countries like China when we don't take a holistic approach to investment in R&D?
Well, I think the administration is very keenly interested in promoting artificial intelligence as a research activity. And NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is part of Commerce, has long been had AI as a very big strategic priority. Our purpose is to develop the foundation for confidence and trust in AI that results in expanded commercial marketplace and new research outcomes. The President's budget provides an increase to NIST of $25 million for measurement tools and test beds to accelerate the development and adoption of interoperable, secure, and reliable
Do you feel
AI
that's enough to make us competitive, sir?
technologies. Further,
Do you feel that's enough to make us competitive, sir?
pardon me?
Is that enough to make us competitive with China, who's spending $8 billion?
Well, we are doing what we can do. There also are initiatives at the White House Office of Science and Technology. There are other administration-wide initiatives, but at the end of the day, the vast bulk of this work is in fact being done by the private sector.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Secretary, later this week, individuals across the U.S. will start receiving invitations to respond to the census using its first ever online option on my2020census.gov. We will obviously be watching this closely in the upcoming months, especially in the light of the recent change from an external to internal system to ensure it can handle a very large number of online respondents at any one time. While I'm hopeful that everything goes smoothly, I want to make sure I understand the plans for if things don't. Can you explain what the contingency plan is if both online systems fail? Will we need to rush to hire more enumerators, increase the number of mailings? What is the plan?
Well, first of all, Chairman, we have two online systems, so they both would have to fail, and they both have redundancy built in because they are cloud-based systems. So the probability of all that collapsing and staying down for an extended period is hopefully very, very low. Second, as I believe I mentioned earlier, we have a fusion center and a crisis management committee. Fusion Center operates 24/7, monitors weather events, monitors all sorts of news events at every single location in the country that we have any relevance to, and it makes recommendations at least daily to the crisis management team. So we have a structural situation that seems as well equipped as we can to deal with it. In terms of fallback position, we deliberately overprinted the questionnaires, the census questionnaires, by quite a lot of millions of units, so that if in some particular region or elsewhere a need for more forms to go out, that at least we have the forms. So we have been trying to be within the normal bounds equipped to deal with crises. It's not practical to reprint all of the census forms. As you can appreciate, that's hundreds of millions of documents. It's the world's largest printing job. So we do not have 100% coverage, but we have very substantial coverage.
So you're confident that there are fallback positions and that, as you said, it would have two systems to fail. But we've seen where hacking and other things or just malfunctions can create havoc. So it's very important for this committee to know at the minimum that you feel confident that it's not going to happen, or if it happens, it can be taken care of.
I do, and the reason I do is we have worked with all of the relevant cybersecurity agencies within federal government, and we also have used outside contractors to try to penetrate the system. And whatever flaws they found, we have corrected. So we are doing the best we can. In today's world, nobody can give 100% assurance that we won't be hacked, but I believe we have at least as effective a protective system as anyone. The data are coded from the moment we get it, while it's in transit, and while it's at rest. There are multiple layers that people need to get through to access the data. And the access of individuals is extremely limited. And those of individuals who do have any access are part of the group that has taken a lifetime oath not to let anything be revealed on individual data. So we've done everything that we can think of to deal with that problem. And to the degree that there are incursions that are successful, we will deal with those on the spot, and we're prepared to deal with them 24/7.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I would like to ask about the Office of Space Commerce. My understanding is that this office is currently reporting directly to your office. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Mr. Secretary, your request to make this operational realignment last year was blocked by language which was carried in both the House and Senate Appropriations reports. So can you explain to me why you have contravened explicit congressional direction? I mean, it was clear that that's not what we wanted.
But we have complied with the congressional direction. The specific direction was that we retain NAPA, an outside agency, to conduct a survey as to where the Office of Space Commerce should be located. The Congress appropriated $1.1 million for that purpose. I'm happy to report we were able to negotiate the contract down to about $880,000. The contract has been signed and NAPA is at work.
My understanding is that you're correct in what you say, except that we have put language in saying, do not move, do not make these moves until the report is in.
But we have not moved it yet, sir. It has not been moved.
What? Yeah, they should be reporting to the Noaa administrator.
I'm sorry?
It should be reporting to the Noaa administrator, and you said it's reporting to you.
I think we have reported, have we not? Yeah.
Well, that's not what we're hearing from Noaa, so maybe you can talk to Noaa and find out why we're getting conflicting information, because we
What
need
is
this.
the information you're getting from Noaa, sir?
That the agency, that they're reporting directly to you.
No, I interact with them, but we have not moved them, nor have we raised the budget. And we look forward to continuing to work with the authorizers and appropriations in hope that we will achieve our goal of moving the office and elevating it to the secretarial level.
Well, in that case, I would hope that you can reach out to them and find out why we're getting this contradictory information.
We will talk with Noaa again today, but whoever told you that it's been moved is incorrect.
All right, thank you. Mr. Adderhold?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, in my opening statement, I mentioned that the devastating effect that tornadoes have had on the Southeast, and particularly I mentioned in Alabama and Tennessee. This budget proposes a $3.2 million increase to establish a tornado warning improvement and extension program to improve the accuracy and timelines of tornado forecasts, predictions, and warnings. However, I'm concerned that this increase is more than offset by a $5 million termination of the Vortex Southeast program and the $1 million reduction of the Tornado Severe Storm Research Line. My question to you is, has Vortex Southeast program accomplished what it set out to do, or is there more still to be done?
Well, the Vortex Southeast program has been a success. We're very happy with it. The physical science work of former past Vortex SE field campaigns will feed into NOAA's new tornado program, which is called Tornado Warming Improvement and Extension Program, TWEEP. And that's codified in the Bipartisan Weather Act. TWEEP and Vortex Southeast are distinct but complementary programs. TWEEP evaluates model improvements, probabilistic guidance products, and the changes in the warning process and in the technologies to get the information out to the public. Vortex SE studies the characteristics of tornadoes that typically occur in the southeastern United States and the public response issues that they encounter with a significant rural and vulnerable population.
If Congress were to restore the Vortex Southeast program for FY21, would it still, as you mentioned, complement this new tornado warning improvement and extension program, or are the two programs in conflict and would have to choose one or the other?
I think we've learned the lessons that we need to learn from the Vortex program, but at the end of the day, it's you fellows who decide where we spend the money. So we would obviously follow your guidance.
NEXRAD is a primary tool that's used by NOAA's meteorologists for issuing warnings for flash floods, for tornadoes, and severe thunderstorms. Though the system is nearing its end of life, according to NOAA's budget request, the federal government is still 20 years away from full deployment of the next generation of weather radar design. And yet this budget proposes to reduce maintenance by $1 million and the service life extension program by $550,000, which will reduce NEXRAD's operational ability from 96% down to 81% by 2025. What is the rationale for cutting back on this critical radar network when we're still 20 years away from fully deploying its replacement?
Yes, sir. The $550,000 decrease for the Service Life Extension Program, SLEP, is a planned decrease. It reflects the award of major contracts on the pedestal and shelter refurbishments and the generator replacement projects that are now in deployment. NEXRAD SLEP is a multi-year effort that began in 2015 and will be completed in 2024. The SLEP will extend the useful life of the NEXRAD array by approximately 15 years. At the same time, NOAA continues to pursue research into its next generation weather radar systems, including the phased array radar program. The $1 million maintenance decrease will result in deferring some routine maintenance and repair of certain components of NOAA's NEXRAD radars, namely the radome and tower maintenance service. But in 2021, the operational ability will remain at 93%, so it's at a pretty high level of effectiveness.
Yeah, well, and what we're concerned, I guess, with is that if you look toward 2025, that there would be a decrease down to 81%. Let me continue on. We've come certainly a long way with weather forecasting, but we all know there's significant room for improvement. Currently, the United States is not the world leader in weather forecasting, but I understand that with recent procurement of additional supercomputers and with the EPIC, which is the Earth Prediction Innovation Center, and with the EPIC initiative, we are positioned to significantly increase our capabilities in the coming years. Can you talk to us about where the U.S. is headed with its weather forecasting capabilities and how this fiscal 21 budget is critical to helping us get there.
Surely, sir. The Bipartisan Weather Act provides NOAA with the path forward on how to reclaim international leadership in weather forecasting. I thank you for supporting that legislation because implementing the Weather Act is a top priority for NOAA. The fiscal 21 budget provides funding for a number of Weather Act mandates, including the Earth Prediction Innovation Center at $15 million. That's the EPIC to which you referred. And that will transform how NOAA collaborates with the weather enterprise on forecast improvements. The fiscal 21 budget request also supports a new Tornado Warning Improvement and Extension Program, TWEEP, which will advance NOAA's tornado observing systems, thunderstorm scale computer models, and risk communication approaches. Finally, the fiscal year 21 budget expands NOAA's commercial weather data pilot project and commercial data purchase program. These programs will allow NOAA to test cutting-edge technologies from the private sector and, if suitable, purchase them to further improve our weather forecast accuracy.
Thank you, I see my time's run out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, we've been going now for an hour and a half. May we take a short break?
Yes.
Unless it's just a little bit more to go.
15 minutes.
Okay, well, let's just go.
We have a few members, and they claim they have only a few, and I accept that, so.
Oh. All right, well, then I'll try my best to hold out.
They state, I'm sorry, not they claim, they state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Ross, you were asked by my colleague, Congresswoman Meng, about this 2020 Congressional District Census that turned out to be a survey sent out by the Republican National Committee. Do you recall those questions Ms. Meng had for you? And I'd like unanimous consent to enter this misleading survey into the record.
Without objection.
Okay. Now, there's a difference, though, Mr. Secretary, between this survey, which is printed out on copy paper, so it's white. The one that was sent to people was on blue paper. Were you aware of that?
I've not seen the one that was sent.
The census itself is on blue paper.
Yes,
Am I correct
yes,
in that?
yes.
Okay, so this is something that was deliberately made to look like the census, and in fact it says 2020 Congressional District Census on the paper. So the idea is this is deliberately made to look like the census and make people think it's the census, and the idea is it will mislead people, and you understand that, Secretary Ross. It'll mislead elderly and or infirm people into thinking that they have already received the census and respond to it, and so mislead them into declining to respond to the actual census when it comes later. You understand all that, right?
To the degree that that were proven to be the case, we would then do the non-response follow-up, namely a person coming around door to door to explain, and preceding that, there would be additional mailings from us to the people.
Well, you're the head of the census, Secretary Ross, is that correct?
Well, I'm the head of commerce to which census is a part.
And you are absolutely committed, are you not, to the accuracy of the census count?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you would be highly attuned to any kind of scams or falsehoods or misleading mailers of this nature, wouldn't you?
Well, as I mentioned to the Senate last week when I was asked a similar question, I have directed the staff at Census to review the information and provide their recommendations. And once that review has been completed, I'll be happy to report back to the committee.
You found out about this this census survey from the RNC before today, didn't you?
Yes, I learned about it a little bit ago.
Okay. How did you find out about it?
Someone raised it with me. I don't recall who.
There was an article on the whole thing in the Los Angeles Times dated February 20 of this year. Did you see that article?
No, I'm not a normal reader of the LA Times, sir.
But you're a reader of everything that has to do with the census, aren't you?
I try to, but you'd be amazed how much written material there is about it nowadays.
Your testimony today was you haven't done anything about this mailer because you're lacking statutory authority to do that. Is that what you said?
No, what I said was, as I mentioned to the Senate last week, I've directed the career staff at Census to see what, if anything, there is we can do about it.
Earlier today, you said you couldn't find any statutory authority to follow up. What did you mean?
That's correct. We have not found it as yet.
Well, when you mislead somebody with a mailer, that's called mail fraud, isn't it?
That's a legal judgment, sir. I'm not qualified to make.
No, but lawyers are. And have you made a referral of this matter to the Justice Department for their review?
No, I have not. I've asked the census staff to figure out what, if anything, we can or should do about it.
When did you ask them that?
Some days ago.
This isn't the first time the RNC did this kind of thing. After the last decennial census in 2010, they did the same sort of thing, and our colleague Carolyn Maloney from New York filed a bill to make that illegal, and my question, and that bill passed. That is the law. And the question is, and it passed on a bipartisan basis, Secretary Ross. So my question is, have you done anything to see if that law applies to this mailer?
As I said, I've asked the staff to review the question. I'm not intimately familiar with that law myself.
I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about a different topic. A new rule shifts responsibility from the State Department to your department for making decisions about whether or not a company will get a license to post the computer code that enables the 3D printing of firearms on the internet. Your department will now soon be responsible for deciding whether downloadable 3D printed guns could become widely available. First question, do you believe that allowing the blueprints of 3D printed guns to be available on the internet is in our nation's best safety and security interest?
The commerce rules were not enjoined by the litigation in the court. The BIS has posted guidance to license applications on its website, and I would direct you there. I'm afraid I can't comment further due to the fact this is in continuing litigation.
You can't answer any questions about your department
About the litigation, no, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recognize the danger of 3D printed guns in general? Doesn't have to be in relation to your department.
Well, yes, as I mentioned, we have provided advice, and the advice is that licenses would have to be applied for. As I understand it, that's not been enjoined by the court.
Do you know that 30% of all guns that have been retrieved in California, for example, are ghost guns?
I'm sorry, couldn't hear.
30% of all guns that are retrieved in California, in the state of California, are ghost guns. Do you know that?
Well, that could well be. Is there a question in that, ma'am?
No, I just asked you yes or no. Do you know that the State Department has previously said that downloadable guns off the internet could be a national security risk?
Yes, I am aware of that.
Do you know that certain 3D printed guns could easily pass through metal detectors without any alarms?
Well, 3D gun publication of plans has not been relieved of an obligation to license. There has been no deregulation of it. The licensing requirement stands as it has been.
Correct. I'm just asking if you realize that 3D guns could, because they're made of plastic, could easily pass through metal detectors without setting off any alarms. And do you agree, do you know that no background checks could be detected because of the needed parts to make 3D guns?
As I say, there's no change in the licensing procedures from what had been before.
So I wanted to, in line with that, there was a man named Cody Wilson who was at the forefront of the downloadable gun movement. He's a self-described anarchist looking to make 3D guns available to anyone with an internet connection. Last September, he was sentenced to 7 years of probation after he pled guilty to injuring a child following accusations that he sexually assaulted a 16-year-old girl. He was required to register as a sex offender. Do you support allowing sexual offenders to have gun licenses?
I think that we have to consider all behavior patterns in deciding whether or not to give a license. And that would certainly be something that one would view with great severity.
Would I be able to get you and the Commerce Department to commit to not issuing a license to this sex offender or anyone else seeking to post downloadable gun computer codes online?
Well, we, as I say, are not changing anything to do with the licensing procedure. We have no intention, assuming that the litigation is resolved, we have no intention of weakening any of the provisions.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, and I hope this will be the last question. But I wanted to give you some information. The RNC attempted to do the same mailer in 2010. Congress passed on a bipartisan basis. As a matter of fact, it was 416-0, the Prevent Deceptive Census Look-alike Mailing Act, to prohibit mailers that could cause Americans to believe they had already filled out the census. Again, the DNC modified the mailer to bypass the law, and the action again drew bipartisan rebuke. Former Representative Jason Chaffetz, a chairman of the Oversight Committee, sent a letter to the chairman of the RNC urging, and I quote, "I write today to ask you to seriously reconsider the use of such deceptive and misleading tactics. Simply put, the RNC should not invoke the official U.S. Census as a means to confuse and deceive recipients of the mailer into opening it thinking they're complying with their civic duty." Then the ranking member, Darrell Issa, introduced legislation to clarify the instances in which the term census can apply on mailers. Just as before, this legislation passed unanimously through both chambers and was signed into law. So again, I'm challenged with how you have this disconnection and you're just looking at it when we have laws on the books and the Republican Party itself has led the legislation to stop this behavior. Yet again, 10 years later, here we are using the same tactics. So, Secretary Ross, there are some things, if you are challenged and don't know what to do with it, there is the Postal Inspection Service who can investigate based on law, and it's also the Department of Justice because we have law to regulate this. And for you as the secretary to just kind of like, I don't know what to do, we're looking into it, have your department research law. Thank you.
We do not believe we have the statutory authority. If it is the case that the Postal Service does or DOJ does, then they're the appropriate parties to enforce. We don't have, as far as we can tell, the unilateral enforcement authority.
So, Mr. Ross, if another group just make up a census form, start knocking on doors, going door to door, you would say, I have no jurisdiction over that. Yes, I know other groups are out there. It's not my responsibility, is what I'm hearing.
No, we lack the authority.
But you have law on the books.
Well, there is a law if there is a law in the books, then those people who are charged with enforcing it are the ones who should enforce it.
Have you recommended that they
do not
enforce the
have
law?
Enforcement authority.
Did you recommend to those who have the authority to enforce the law?
I think they should do what their legal counsel tells them they're obliged to do under the law.
Secretary, I just want you to know that I just find those answers to be confusing and unacceptable because the census, we have allocated over, and for 2020, $6.7 billion to conduct the census. That's our taxpayer dollars. And you've given your answers, but I find them unacceptable. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we don't have the authority to do some of the things you might like us to do.
Mr. Secretary, before we close, let me just tell you that this committee, as you can see, is very much interested in how we conduct the census. And very hard around here, almost impossible, to get a bipartisan bill passed with no opposition. And that bill was clear that these kind of behaviors were not to be accepted. So who enforces it? I think it behooves you and other people in the administration to find out from each other who enforces it so it doesn't happen again, or that we can deal with what is happening right now. Please, and I thank you for your testimony today. There will be more questions for the record. In a friendly way, I ask you to please consider answering those questions much sooner than last year's questions, which just got answered 4 days ago, because we're cutting the hearing at this point, but the questions are still important to us, and we need the answers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and the committee is adjourned.